It was a lifetime ago, but the pain feels like yesterday. They took everything from me.
I always believed that family was everything. It was the foundation of my world, the reason I sacrificed so much, the one thing that kept me going through years of hardship. Every decision I made, every hour I spent working overtime, every part of myself that I gave away, it was all for him, my son Jake. From the moment he was born, I poured everything I had into raising him, trying to give him opportunities I never had. I thought if I could make him successful, happy, that my life would have meaning. And for years, it felt like it was all worth it. But then, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. One day, Jake, the boy I had raised with such care, looked me in the eye and told me that I was a burden, that I needed to leave. It was a blow I never saw coming. The man I had poured my soul into, the one I had given up everything for, had turned against me. I was left standing there, shattered, unable to comprehend the words that were coming from his mouth. How could he say this after everything I had done for him? My heart broke in that instant, but I didn't argue. I couldn't. I knew it was over. I packed a few things, not knowing where I was going or what the future held, just that I had to go. What Jake didn't realize was that this moment would set into motion something he never expected. What happened next would change everything and leave him speechless. I spent decades working with calloused hands, always tired but never complaining. My life, my body, my very soul. None of it was ever truly mine. It was for him, Jake. From the day he was born, I knew that my role in this world was to make sure he had everything I never did. I was born into a life of struggle. My parents did what they could, but they weren't able to give us much. I remember working in the fields, as a young boy watching the sun rise and set, each day a blur of sweat and labor. There was no time for dreams back then, only survival. I vowed to myself that I would work hard enough to give my son the opportunities I never had. I wanted him to grow up knowing that he was loved, that he had choices, that his future wouldn't be bound by the same limitations that had held me back. As Jake grew, I worked harder and harder to build a life for him. Every decision I made, every long day and sleepless night was to secure his future. I didn't ask for anything in return, not a word of thanks, not a moment of praise. I never needed it. As long as Jake was safe, happy, and on the right path, I could live with the exhaustion. I remember the times when I would come home after a long day at the factory, my back aching from lifting boxes and machinery, only to find Jake waiting for me. He'd have a new question or some little project he was working on, and I'd try my best to be present for him, even though I could barely keep my eyes open. My body was breaking down, but my heart swelled with pride every time I saw him smile. Spent so many years putting my own needs and desires on hold, thinking that the sacrifices I was making would lead to something better. When Jake was in school, I sacrificed my time to help him with his homework, even though I was often too tired to think straight. When he played sports, I sacrificed weekends to drive him to games, to cheer him on, even when I could barely afford the gas. And when he grew older, I worked double shifts to make sure he could have the things he needed, the right clothes, the new shoes, the tech gadgets that all the other kids had. I wasn't rich by any means, but I managed. I did what I had to do. For him. As time passed, I watched Jake grow into a young man. I was proud of him. So proud. He was everything I had hoped for. Smart, ambitious, kind-hearted. He got good grades, had a circle of friends who cared for him, and was on the path to a bright future. I began to think that maybe all the sacrifices had been worth it. I thought that as he got older, we'd be able to take a step back, enjoy some of the fruits of my labor together. I'd get to see him graduate, maybe start his own family one day, and I'd finally be able to rest. But that rest never came. Jake started to drift away from me as he entered adulthood. At first I thought it was just a phase, a sign of him becoming more independent. I tried to give him space, tried to give him the freedom I hadn't had when I was his age. I didn't want to suffocate him, to make him feel like he had to carry the weight of my expectations. But as the months went on, I began to notice a change in him. The calls became less frequent, and when we did talk, they were brief, as if he were just going through the motions. I wasn't part of his life the way I used to be. He started to make his own decisions without consulting me, and though I tried to respect that, there was a part of me that felt disconnected from him. The bond we once had seemed to be slipping away, and it hurt more than I wanted to admit. Still, I didn't give up on him. I told myself that this was normal, that all parents go through it, that it was just part of growing up. I tried to keep my distance while still offering my help when he needed it. But as time went on, my instincts told me something was wrong, something deeper than just the growing pains of independence. I could see the change in his attitude, the coldness in his words. He wasn't the boy I raised anymore. The day he told me I was a burden, that I needed to leave, was the moment everything shattered. In that instant, I was no longer his protector, his father, the man who had given up everything to see him succeed. I was nothing. The years of sacrifice, the days of hard work, the love I had poured into him, it all meant nothing in that moment. I couldn't even argue. I didn't want to argue. What was the point? The son I had given my life for had turned his back on me. How could I continue to fight for a relationship when he no longer wanted it? I packed my things in silence. It wasn't easy. Every item I gathered felt like another piece of my life being ripped away. The house that once felt like home now felt like a prison. Jake didn't try to stop me. He didn't beg me to stay. His eyes were empty, distant. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. He had made his decision, and I had to make mine. So, I left. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do, but I couldn't stay there anymore. I walked out with nothing but a few clothes and a broken heart. The only thing I knew for sure was that I couldn't keep living in the shadow of a son who no longer cared. I had spent my life giving everything for him, and in return, I was cast aside. But what Jake didn't know was that I wasn't as helpless as he thought. Over the years, while he was growing up, I had been quietly building a life for myself. Small investments here, a little bit of savings there. I had always believed in taking care of myself just in case. And now, as I stood outside the house I had worked so hard to make a home, I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. My life wasn't over. It was just beginning. And what I did next would change everything. I had spent so long living for him, sacrificing for him, that I had forgotten what it meant to live for myself, but now I was going to find out. It wasn't about revenge or proving anything to him. It was about rediscovering who I was, what I was capable of, and how strong I truly was. I didn't need his approval, and I didn't need his love. I had spent a lifetime giving everything for him. Now it was time to give something back to myself. This was the moment I would finally start living, not for anyone else, but for me. And Jake? He would learn the hard way that the man he had discarded wasn't someone to be taken for granted. As Jake grew older, things began to change between us. At first, it was subtle. The conversations that once flowed so naturally started to feel strained. The laughter, the small jokes, and the stories I used to share with him became few and far between. I told myself it was just a phase. He was becoming a young adult after all. It was only natural that he would start to pull away and focus on his own life. I thought maybe he was busy with school, or friends, or even trying to figure out what he wanted to do with his future. It wasn't easy for me to accept, but I tried to respect his growing independence. I wasn't the kind of father who believed in suffocating his children with expectations. I wanted him to spread his wings and chase his own dreams. But deep down, I was terrified. I had given him everything. Every sacrifice I made, every ounce of energy I poured into raising him, I did so with the hope that he would grow up to be happy and successful. It was a labor of love, but as he drifted away, I felt that love slipping through my fingers. I told myself that maybe this was just part of the process. Maybe this distance was necessary for him to become the man he was meant to be. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how far apart we had become. The phone calls were fewer, the visits were shorter, and when we did talk, it felt like he was talking to a stranger. I tried to ignore it, convinced that he was just going through a phase of adolescence. But even as he started achieving more in life, getting accepted into a good college, excelling in his studies, and starting to build his own career, the gap between us only widened. It wasn't the kind of success I had envisioned for him. I had imagined a future where we could sit down together, share a beer, talk about his dreams, and even laugh about the old days. But instead, it felt like I was an outsider in his life, like I didn't belong anymore. The connection we once had seemed to vanish, and I didn't know how to get it back. I remember one evening when he came home for a short visit after months of not seeing each other. I thought it was a chance for us to reconnect. I had prepared his favorite dinner, something simple, but I knew he'd appreciate it. I'd even dug out an old family album, hoping we could reminisce about the good times we had shared. But when he walked through the door, I immediately noticed something different. He didn't greet me the way he used to. There was no enthusiasm in his voice, no warmth in his eyes. He looked distracted, almost distant. I could tell that something was on his mind, but I didn't want to push him. I just wanted to talk, to reconnect, to make things feel normal again. We sat down at the dinner table. I tried to keep the conversation light. I asked about his studies, how things were going with his friends, and how his life was shaping up. I was genuinely interested, but it felt like he was only half listening. He answered with short, disinterested responses, barely making eye contact. The more I spoke, the more I felt like I was talking to a wall. I had hoped for some connection, a moment where we could both reflect on how far he'd come and how proud I was of him. But there was nothing. It was like we were strangers, sitting in the same room but worlds apart. After dinner, we sat down in the living room and I could feel the tension building. It was like there was something unspoken between us, something I was too afraid to bring up. And then, without warning, Jake said the words that would change everything. He looked at me with a coldness I had never seen before and simply said, "You're a burden to me. I don't want you here anymore. Get out." The words hit me like a physical blow, as if someone had punched me in the chest. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't comprehend what he was saying. I had spent my entire life making sure he had everything he needed: love, support, guidance. And now, in this moment, it felt like it had all been for nothing. The shock was overwhelming. I wanted to scream, to tell him how hurt I was, to make him understand how much I had given up for him. But I couldn't. There was nothing left in me. I just stared at him, trying to process the reality of what was happening. I had always been his protector, the one he turned to for advice, for help, for comfort. How had it all gone so wrong? How had the love I poured into him turned into resentment and anger? The silence between us grew unbearable, and I felt my heart breaking in real time. Jake didn't seem to care. He didn't even flinch. It was as if he had made up his mind, and there was no turning back. The pain I felt was unlike anything I had ever experienced. I had always believed that family, especially a father and son, was unbreakable. No matter what happened, we would always have each other. But in that moment, I realized that was just a fantasy. Jake didn't need me anymore, and maybe he never truly did. I don't remember much of the rest of that evening. I just remember standing up slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me. I packed a few things, but I didn't know where I was going. I didn't have a plan. I just knew that I couldn't stay in that house any longer, not when he had made it clear that I wasn't welcome. I couldn't understand it. It was like everything I had done for him, all the sacrifices, all the sleepless nights, the missed opportunities, the years of hard work, none of it mattered anymore. I left the house that night without looking back. I didn't want to see his face, the face of the son I had raised, the one who had become a stranger to me. But even as I walked away, something inside me snapped. I had spent my whole life living for him, doing everything for him, and now it was time to live for myself. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I couldn't keep clinging to someone who no longer wanted me in their life. The words he said, the way he looked at me, were seared into my memory. I could still hear them echoing in my mind. "You're a burden to me. Get out." Those words would haunt me, but they would also be the catalyst for something I never expected. What Jake didn't know was that this moment, this betrayal, was going to change everything. And in time, he would realize just how wrong he had been. I didn't argue, I couldn't. The words hung in the air, suffocating me, leaving me speechless. "You're a burden to me. Get out." My son, the boy I had dedicated my life to, had just told me to leave. A son I had poured every ounce of my love, time, and energy into, who I had sacrificed for, worked for, dreamed for. I had given him the best of myself, and in return this was the price I paid. His rejection, his coldness, his dismissal. It wasn't as if I hadn't seen the signs. The distance had been growing for months, maybe longer, but I had been too afraid to acknowledge it. I thought maybe he was just busy with life, focused on his future, on his career. He was a young man now, after all, and I had to give him room to grow. I told myself that he needed his space, that maybe our relationship was naturally evolving into something different. Maybe it wasn't supposed to be the same as when he was a child, when he would run to me for comfort, for guidance. But what I hadn't realized was that the space I had been giving him wasn't just physical, it was emotional. He wasn't just growing up. He was growing away from me, further and further with each passing day. And now, there I was, standing in front of him, unable to even understand the man he had become. The man I thought I knew, the boy who had once clung to my side, was no longer there. There was no trace of the love we had shared, no sign of the bond we once had. Instead, there was a stranger in front of me, looking at me with such indifference, such bitterness that it shook me to my core. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that after everything I had done for him, after all the sacrifices I had made, this is how it ended. He was asking me to leave. No hesitation, no remorse, just cold, hard words. I opened my mouth trying to say something, anything. I wanted to ask him why, to beg him to see how much this hurt. I wanted to tell him that I was his father, that I had spent my life making sure he had every opportunity, that I had given up everything to make his life better. But no words came. It wasn't just the pain that paralyzed me. It was the realization that no matter what I said, it wouldn't matter. He had made up his mind, and deep down I knew that nothing I could say would change the fact that he had decided I was no longer worthy of his love. I felt the tears well up in my eyes, but I fought them back. I wouldn't cry, not in front of him. I couldn't let him see just how deeply his words had cut me. It was like a knife to the heart, and I couldn't let him see how much it was bleeding. I had spent my whole life protecting him, guiding him, loving him unconditionally. And now, in one single moment, it was all gone. He didn't need me anymore, and that hurt more than I could ever put into words. I turned and walked away, slowly, quietly. The house that had once been my home, the place where I had raised him, where we had shared so many memories, suddenly felt foreign. The walls seemed to close in on me, the air thick with the weight of my failure. I was leaving behind everything I had worked for, my hopes, my dreams for him, all the years I had invested into making sure he had a good life. And for what? So that he could turn his back on me? It didn't make sense. It felt like a nightmare, one I couldn't wake up from. As I packed my things in silence, I tried to hold it together. I didn't want to break down, not in front of him. But the pain was unbearable. I had to leave. But the thought of walking away from my own son, from the life I had built, tore me apart. I tried to focus on the task at hand, gathering up a few of my belongings, things I could carry with me. There wasn't much. I didn't need much, not anymore. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered anymore. In that moment, I realized something that I hadn't fully understood before. The man I had spent my whole life raising, the boy I had loved with every fiber of my being, wasn't the person I thought he was. Somewhere along the way, he had changed. And I hadn't seen it. Maybe I had been too focused on my own struggles, on providing for him, to notice that he was pulling away. Or maybe he had always been this way and I just hadn't been willing to see it. Either way, the realization was devastating. He was no longer my little boy. The love I had given him, the guidance I had provided, the life I had shaped for him, it didn't matter. I stood in the doorway, my bag in hand, ready to leave. I couldn't look at him. I couldn't bear to see the emptiness in his eyes, the coldness that had replaced the warmth that once existed between us. But I knew I had no choice. He didn't want me there. He didn't need me anymore. So I walked away. With nothing but a few belongings and a heart full of pain, I left the only home I had ever known. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Part 2. The weight of my departure settled in my chest as I stepped out into the night air, the cool breeze hitting my face, a stark contrast to the suffocating heaviness of the house. I walked down the street, each step echoing in the quiet of the night. My mind was a storm, a whirlwind of confusion, anger, and sorrow. I had no plan, no destination, just the overwhelming need to get away, to put as much distance between me and the son who had just shattered everything we had built. I had spent so many years trying to be the father he needed me to be, putting my own dreams and desires aside, sacrificing my peace of mind, my health, my happiness, all for him. I had given him the best of me, and this was the thanks I got. This was the price of unconditional love. Rejection? I couldn't understand, yet I still couldn't. As I walked aimlessly, I felt the tears finally start to fall. I couldn't stop them. I didn't want to. I had spent so much time trying to be strong, to hold everything together, but now, alone in the cold night, I couldn't help it. I was broken. My heart, once full of love and pride for my son, was now a hollow ache. The pain was so sharp, so intense, that it took my breath away. How had it come to this? How had the love we shared turned into something so cold, so distant? I didn't know where I was going. I didn't have a place to stay, not yet. I had nothing. I couldn't go back. Not after what he had said to me. But at that moment, I realized something. Even though Jake had rejected me, even though he had cast me aside, I was still standing. I was still breathing. I wasn't going to let him destroy me. I wasn't going to let his words define me. I kept walking. I didn't know where I would end up, but I knew one thing for sure. I was going to find a way to rebuild my life. I had spent my entire existence living for him, but now I was going to live for myself. The road ahead was uncertain and the pain would linger, but I knew I couldn't go back to the man I had been, the man who had let his identity be consumed by his role as a father. I had to find myself again, even if it meant walking through the darkness alone. Jake might have pushed me out of his life, but he hadn't broken me. Not yet. And he never would. The cool night air hit my face like a sharp slap, its bite enough to clear the fog in my mind, but it couldn't erase the sting in my heart. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself as I stepped away from the only home I had ever known, the house that had once been filled with warmth and laughter, with memories of family dinners, late-night talks, and the comfort of knowing that I was doing my best for the person I loved most in this world. Now, it felt empty, hollow. Each step I took away from that house felt heavier than the last, the weight of everything I had worked for, everything I had given up, pressing down on me. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't even know what I was supposed to do next. I had packed only a few of my things, nothing valuable, just the essentials. But even with those few belongings, I felt like I was carrying the weight of an entire lifetime. A lifetime spent giving, loving, protecting, and now, discarded. As I walked down the street, the pain in my chest deepened. It wasn't just about being kicked out. It was about the rejection, the coldness in his words. My son, the boy I had raised, the one I thought would always be my companion in life, had called me a burden. And the worst part? He had said it with such indifference, like he had been planning it for a long time, and that I was nothing more than an inconvenience to him. The anger inside me surged, but it was quickly overtaken by a deep, aching sadness. How had I gotten here? How had I gone from being his hero, his provider, to being the man he wanted to forget? I couldn't stop, walking as though moving through the night would help me escape the anguish that kept threatening to overwhelm me. My feet carried me aimlessly through the quiet streets, the sound of my footsteps the only thing filling the silence. The world felt so distant, as though I had been thrust into a different reality, one where nothing made sense. Everything I had believed in was crumbling around me. My son, the person I had devoted my entire life to, was gone. Not physically, but emotionally. He didn't need me anymore, and he hadn't even given me the courtesy of an explanation. As I walked, the tears I had fought so hard to hold back finally came. They fell silently, one after another, each drop a reminder of the depth of my pain. I wasn't angry, not at first anyway. No, the initial shock had been too much to process. I had loved him so much, given him everything, and in return, he had rejected me in the most painful way possible. I wanted to scream, to yell at him for making me feel so insignificant, but I knew it wouldn't do any good. It wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't bring back the connection we once had, the love we shared. The emptiness I felt in my chest was like a black hole, swallowing everything around it. My mind raced, asking questions I couldn't answer. Had I failed him as a father? Had I not done enough? Could I have done more to keep him close? The guilt gnawed at me, making me question every decision I had ever made. All those sacrifices, all those years of working tirelessly, of putting my own life on hold. Had it all been for nothing? I kept walking, trying to push the thoughts away, trying to silence the voice in my head that kept replaying the moment he told me to leave. "You're a burden to me," he had said. His words were simple, but they cut deeper than anything I could have imagined. How could he say that? How could he dismiss everything we had built? I wanted to believe that it was just a moment of anger, a fleeting emotion that would pass. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. This was something more than that. This was a rejection of who I was, of the father I had tried to be, and that realization hurt more than anything. I didn't know where I was going, but I didn't care. I just needed to keep moving. I needed to escape the suffocating reality that had been forced on me. As I wandered through the empty streets, I began to realize something I hadn't fully understood before. I had spent my whole life living for him. Every choice I had made, every sacrifice I had endured, had been for Jake. But now, I was alone. I had nothing left but myself. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I needed to stop living for him and start living for me. It wasn't a thought I liked. I didn't want to admit it, but it was true. I had been so focused on being the perfect father, on giving him the world, that I had lost myself in the process. I had forgotten what it meant to live for myself, to have dreams that didn't revolve around him. In a way, Jake's rejection had forced me to confront the truth that I had been avoiding for years. I had been living for someone else, and now I had to find a way to live for me. I found myself at a small park, one I had walked through countless times in the past. It was quiet, empty, save for the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. I sat on a bench, the weight of everything finally catching up with me. I felt the sting of loneliness, the ache of abandonment, but I also felt something else, something I hadn't expected. A flicker of hope. I wasn't broken, not yet. I had been through hard times before, had faced challenges that seemed insurmountable. I had always bounced back, and this time wouldn't be any different. I didn't know what the future held, or if Jake and I would ever repair what had been broken between us, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let him destroy me. I wasn't going to let his rejection define me. In that moment, sitting alone in the park, I made a promise to myself. I would rebuild. I would find my way back to who I was before all of this, before fatherhood consumed me. It was time to take back the life I had put on hold for so long. I wasn't just a father. I was a person, with my own dreams, my own desires, and I would find them again. I stood up from the bench, taking a deep breath. The night air was still cold, but it no longer felt suffocating. I was ready to move forward. One step at a time, I would find my way, and no matter what happened, no matter how far Jake drifted from me, I would always remember that I had the strength to rebuild, to rise from the ashes of what had been destroyed. I was more than just a father. I was Robert, and I was going to find my way back to myself. What Jake didn't know was that I wasn't just some old man with no future, someone who had simply lived his life for him and nothing else. He had seen me as nothing more than an old burden, a man past his prime, who had no purpose anymore. But that couldn't have been further from the truth. Over the years, while he had been busy building his own life and pulling away from me, I had been quietly planning, preparing for this day. The day when I would no longer be defined by my role as his father, the man who worked tirelessly to provide, for him to give him everything. No, I had spent my years not just giving but quietly building something for myself, a future that didn't rely on him, or anyone else for that matter. I had always known deep down that nothing was certain. In life, even when I was at my lowest, when I was working double shifts just to keep the lights on and food on the table, I understood that the future could change in an instant. I couldn't allow myself to be completely dependent on anyone, not even on my own son, because I knew that life had a way of throwing curveballs when you least expected it. So, without Jake ever knowing, I had started saving. It was never much, just small amounts here and there, but it added up over the years. More importantly, I had invested in a small business, nothing flashy, just a modest venture that I had been running on the side for years. It wasn't anything that would make me rich, but it was enough to provide some stability, a small cushion I could rely on. And then there was the land. The small piece of property that I had bought years ago, a piece of land on the outskirts of town. I had always dreamed of having something of my own, something that I could call mine, something to leave behind when my time came. I had kept it a secret from Jake, not out of malice, but because I never wanted him to feel burdened by my dreams. It was a place where I could imagine building a small home, living out my days in peace, away from the demands and pressures of the world. But when everything fell apart, when Jake rejected me, when he told me I was a burden, I realized that this was no longer just a dream. It was a plan, a new beginning. At that moment, as I packed my few belongings and walked out of the house, I didn't feel defeated. I didn't feel like I had lost everything, even though it was hard to ignore the sting of rejection. What Jake didn't understand was that his rejection of me wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter. What he saw as my failure, my downfall, was actually the push I needed to finally take control of my own life. It was the moment I realized that I no longer had to live in the shadows of my past, of the years spent sacrificing everything for a future that had crumbled. I could start over, not just for him, but for me. The first thing I did was move into the small house I had bought on that piece of land. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It felt strange at first walking through the door of a place that was all mine, a place I could call home without anyone else's expectations hanging over me. I looked around, and while it wasn't the grand, beautiful house I had imagined, for my family it felt like the start of something new. There was a sense of freedom there, a sense of possibility. I didn't need to impress anyone. I didn't need to prove anything. This was my space, my sanctuary, where I could rebuild. I spent the first few days cleaning and organizing, getting the place ready. I didn't have much, but I didn't need much. I was starting fresh, and I realized that in many ways, I had never truly allowed myself to do that before. My whole life had been wrapped up in Jake, in his success, his happiness. But now, for the first time in decades, I had the freedom to focus on myself, and that felt like a gift. I began working harder on my small business, pouring more of myself into it than I had in years. It had always been something on the side, but now I saw its potential. I wasn't just running a small operation anymore. I was building something. I started expanding, reaching out to new clients, looking for opportunities to grow. Slowly, But surely it began to pick up. The first few weeks were hard. There were days when it felt like nothing was working, like I was pushing a boulder uphill. But I kept going. I reminded myself that I had done hard things before. This was no different. The quiet nights in my small house became moments of reflection, of peace. I thought about Jake, of course. How could I not? I had loved him with everything I had, and part of me still wanted him to see me as the man I was, not the man he thought I had become. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't control how he saw me anymore. He had made his choice, and as painful as it was, I had to let him go. I couldn't keep living in the past, hoping he would come back to me, hoping for a reconciliation that may never come. The only person I had control over was myself, and I had to focus on rebuilding my own life, on becoming the man I wanted to be. And then, something unexpected happened. As my business grew, I started getting offers. Small at first, but they kept coming. People who saw potential in what I was doing, who wanted to invest, to partner with me. I began to realize that what I had been doing all along, quietly building, quietly investing, had actually prepared me for something bigger. I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. It was around that time when I received a phone call from Jake. I wasn't sure what to expect. The last time we had spoken, it had ended, with him asking me to leave, with his words still fresh in my mind. But this time his voice was different. He was softer, almost hesitant. He asked if we could meet, if we could talk. I didn't know what to feel. I wanted to be angry, to tell him how much he had hurt me. But something told me that this moment was different. Maybe he had realized something, or maybe he was just reaching out in a moment of vulnerability. I didn't know, but I agreed to meet him. As I sat there waiting for him to arrive, I realized something. What had broken me, what had caused the pain of rejection and loss, was also the thing that had pushed me to rebuild my life. It forced me to look within myself and find the strength I never knew I had. The pain of his rejection had turned into my greatest motivation. It had ignited something in me, a fire that would not be extinguished. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was a man with his own dreams, his own purpose. And no matter what happened, in the future I knew one thing for sure. I would never let anyone, not even my own son, take that away from me again. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but over the months since I left, I began to rebuild. Not just my life, but myself. I had stepped away from the wreckage of my old world, and in doing so, I started to understand something deeper. Life wasn't over, it was just beginning. I wasn't just surviving anymore, scraping by, trying to hold on to whatever pieces of my past life I could salvage. No, I was thriving. The small house I had bought was modest, but it was mine, a place where I could be myself without anyone's expectations weighing down on me. It wasn't luxurious, but it was a sanctuary where I could finally breathe, where I could find the peace I had been so desperately searching for. I threw myself into my small business with a renewed passion, a fire I hadn't known I had. I made connections, built relationships with people who believed in what I was trying to do, and slowly but surely things started to come together. Each success, no matter how small, felt like a victory. I wasn't just rebuilding my finances, I was rebuilding my sense of self-worth. I had spent so many years tied to the idea of being a father first and foremost that I had forgotten who I was as a person. I had buried my own dreams beneath the weight of responsibilities that, in the end, had left me feeling invisible, overshadowed by my role as Jake's father. But now, for the first time in decades, I was reclaiming those dreams, embracing the possibility of a future that wasn't tied to anyone else's definition of success. I spent my days working on the business, meeting clients, setting goals, and pushing myself beyond the limits I had once thought were insurmountable. Nights were quieter, filled with reflection. I would sit in my small living room, staring out the window at the stars, thinking about everything I had lost and everything I had gained. There were still moments when I thought about Jake, when I wondered what had happened to the bond we had shared. But those moments became fewer, less consuming. I realized that my life didn't have to revolve around him anymore. My identity was mine to define. There were days when it was hard, when the loneliness crept in and the weight of the past threatened to pull me under. But on those days, I reminded myself that I was no longer the man I had been when I walked out of the house. I wasn't the broken father who had been rejected. I wasn't the man who had allowed his life to be defined by another person. I was stronger than that. And with each passing day, I became more and more confident in my ability to stand on my own. Then one day, as I was finishing up a project at my new home, I heard a knock on the door. It wasn't the sound of a neighbor or a friend stopping by. It was hesitant, unsure, the kind of knock you hear when someone isn't sure they should be there. My heart skipped a beat before I even opened the door. Part of me knew who it was, before I even saw him. There stood Jake, looking different, shrunken somehow, the arrogance I had once seen in him replaced by something more vulnerable. He didn't look like the confident, independent young man who had asked me to leave. No, he looked tired, defeated, like someone who had realized just how far he had fallen. His posture was slumped, his face drawn, and there was a hesitance in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came at first. He seemed almost unsure of himself, like he wasn't sure how to even begin. Finally, he cleared his throat and said the words that I never thought I'd hear from him. "Dad, I need help." His voice was strained, almost fragile, as though he was too proud to admit it but didn't have any other choice. In that moment, I couldn't help but feel a surge of conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to be angry, to remind him of everything he had done to me, to tell him how much it had hurt to be cast aside. But another part of me, maybe the part that had always been a father, wanted to help him. I wanted to reach out, to tell him that everything would be okay. But something inside me stopped me from rushing into that familiar role of caretaker. I had done that for so long. I had given so much of myself to him, but what had it gotten me? I stood there for a moment studying him, the boy who had once been my whole world. The one I had sacrificed everything for was now standing in front of me, vulnerable, needing me in a way he never had before. It was a moment I never could have predicted. I stepped aside and let him, and though I wasn't sure what to say or how to respond, as he walked into the house, I could see him taking in the modest surroundings, the small but comfortable place I had made for myself. It wasn't the house he had grown up in, the place filled with memories of family dinners and holiday traditions. This was different. It was new. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like home. "I've been struggling," Jake said, his voice quieter now. I don't know where to turn. Everything I've worked for is falling apart, and I don't know what to do anymore." There was no arrogance in his voice now, no pride, just raw honesty. And for the first time in a long time, I saw him, really saw him, not as the angry young man who had cast me aside, but as my son, someone who was lost and needed guidance. In that moment, something inside me shifted. I wasn't the same man who had left months ago. I wasn't the broken father, desperate for his son's approval. I had changed. I had found strength in my own journey, and I had built something for myself. I wasn't going to let Jake's struggles dictate my worth, but I also knew that I wasn't going to turn my back on him, not completely. This was a moment of reckoning, for both of us. Part 2. I sat across from Jake, trying to find the right words, unsure of how to proceed. The years of hurt, the pain of being cast aside, all swirled within me. But I knew I had to be different, now. I wasn't going to fall back into the pattern of self-sacrifice, of giving everything for someone who hadn't earned it. I had learned that the hard way, but I also knew that I couldn't ignore his plea for help. "Jake," I began, my voice steady but with an edge of something I hadn't felt in years. "I'm not the man I was when I left. I've rebuilt my life. I've found peace. I'm not going to be your savior, but I will help you. You need to help yourself first, though. I've been where you are, lost, unsure, needing someone to show me the way. But in the end, I had to find my own path." Jake looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of shame and recognition. He nodded slowly, understanding what I was saying. This wasn't about me giving him everything again. This wasn't about me saving him from his own mistakes. This was about him learning to stand on his own 2 feet, to take responsibility for the life he had built. The shift in him was subtle, but it was there. The realization that he wasn't the same man who had dismissed me so callously months ago was evident. He was no longer angry or arrogant. He was vulnerable, real, and ready to change. But more than that, he was seeing me for the first time, not as his father who owed him everything, but as a man who had found his own strength. "I don't expect you to fix everything," I continued. "But I'm here if you want to try to figure things out, but you have to do the work." There was a long pause, and then, for the first time in months, Jake's shoulders relaxed. He seemed to understand. He didn't say much after that, but there was something in his eyes, something that hadn't been there before. It was a recognition that I wasn't the man he had left behind. I had changed. I had built something for myself. And in that moment, I saw that he was starting to understand, that he needed to do the same. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. And if Jake wanted to find his way, he would have to start thriving too. I sat across from Jake, the silence between us heavy, filled with years of unspoken words and emotions that neither of us had fully processed. His vulnerability was palpable, a sharp contrast to the confident young man who had once pushed me away without a second thought. Now he looked like someone who had hit a wall, someone who had been knocked down by life and was unsure how to get back up. I could see the desperation in his eyes, the same eyes that once looked at me with admiration and later with coldness. The boy I had raised was still there, but he had been buried beneath layers of pride, arrogance, and most of all pain. "Jake," I began, my voice calm but firm. "I'm not the man I was when I left. I've had to rebuild my own life step by step. I'm not the father you once knew, the one who sacrificed everything for you. I've learned that I can't lose myself in you anymore. I'm my own person, but I'm still your father, and I'm here for you." Jake's eyes softened as he absorbed my words, and for a moment I saw the boy I had raised in that vulnerable look. He didn't speak at first, perhaps unsure of how to process what I had just said. The distance between us was palpable, yet there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He wasn't looking at me with the same anger or resentment he had months ago. I wasn't sure if it was regret or just the reality of his own struggles weighing on him, but in that moment he seemed to understand something he hadn't before. I had changed. I wasn't the man he thought he could push aside without consequence. I had found my own strength, and it had nothing to do with him. It was mine. But that didn't mean I was going to turn my back on him. "I don't expect you to fix everything, Jake," I continued, trying to steady my voice. "But if you want to figure things out, you'll have to start with yourself. I've been where you are, unsure, struggling. But in the end, I had to find my own way. I'm here to help, but you have to be willing to do the work too. I can't save you from yourself." Jake nodded slowly, and I saw a flicker of understanding pass across his face. It wasn't just about needing help. It was about realizing that he had to help himself first. He couldn't rely on me to solve his problems, just as I couldn't keep relying on him for validation or approval. We had both been caught in a cycle where our expectations of each other had blurred, where love had been overshadowed by need and resentment. This was a moment of reckoning for both of us. He looked down at his hands for a moment, clearly reflecting on my words. Then, almost timidly, he spoke, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it. "I messed up, didn't I?" The vulnerability in his voice was unmistakable, and it felt like a break in the wall he had built around himself. He wasn't just the young man who had rejected me anymore. He was a son, acknowledging his mistakes and the pain he had caused. "You did," I said, keeping my tone even, but not harsh. "But we both have. The difference now is that you can make it right. Not with me, but with yourself." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle between us. "I'm not asking for your apology. I'm asking you to take responsibility for where you are, for who you've become. I've done the same for myself. I've had to rebuild too. You can't keep running from your own choices, Jake. At some point, you have to face them. The silence that followed felt less tense than before. There was a shift in the air, a subtle change. Jake was no longer the man who had cast me aside without a second thought. He was a young man facing his own brokenness, perhaps realizing that I wasn't just a father to him, but a reflection of what he had become. I wasn't just a part of his past anymore. I had evolved, and now, in this moment, I saw him starting to understand that he too needed to evolve. I don't know what to do next, Jake admitted, his voice small, almost defeated. I don't even know how to start fixing everything. Then start small, I replied, my voice softer now, but still firm. Start by taking responsibility for your actions. Admit where you've gone wrong, and then make the decision to do better. It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to happen overnight, but you have to begin somewhere. I looked at him, searching his face for any sign of the arrogance or resistance that had once been there. But now there was only a quiet acceptance, a willingness to listen. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was seeing my son for who he truly was. Not the angry, prideful young man who had pushed me away, but a person who was struggling, who had made mistakes, and who was finally ready to face the consequences. There was no quick fix, no magic words that would make everything right, but I could see the wheels turning in his mind. For the first time in a long time, Jake was seeing that his future wasn't just about the past mistakes he had made. It was about what he would choose to do next. I can't promise things will be the same, I said, my voice steady but carrying the weight of everything I had been through. But I can promise this. I'll be here, if you're willing to put in the work. This is about you now. You have to want it for yourself. Jake didn't respond immediately, but as I looked at him, I could see something new in his eyes. The arrogance, the distance. It was gone. What I saw instead was a man who was beginning to take responsibility for his own life. A man who realized that the path to healing, to growth, wasn't going to come from running away or from expecting others to fix him. It would come from within. And that was the first step toward the person he was meant to become. For both of us, this was a new beginning. Not one defined by the past or the mistakes we had made, but by the choices we would make from here on out. And that realization, both for me and for Jake, was the turning point. It wasn't just about me being there for him anymore. It was about both of us becoming the people we were meant to be, apart from each other, but still connected by the bond that had always been there even when we couldn't see it. Jake didn't say much at first. He stood there in the doorway of my small, humble house as though trying to process the scene in front of him. I could see it in his eyes, that mixture of regret and realization. He had expected to find a broken man, someone defeated by his rejection, someone who had been crushed by the weight of his words. But instead, he found a man who had rebuilt himself from the ground up, piece by piece, through sweat and determination, but also through something deeper, something that couldn't be bought or earned. It was the courage to stand up for myself, to find my own voice after years of silence. The Jake I saw before me wasn't the same man who had kicked me out of his life months ago. He was different, vulnerable, remorseful, and perhaps even a little humbled. The arrogance, the distance, the coldness, those walls had come down, and in their place there was a man who was beginning to understand just how much he had hurt me, how much he had taken for granted. For the first time, I saw in him the awareness that he had made a mistake. I didn't have to say anything. His eyes spoke volumes. I wasn't the man he thought I was, the man he had discarded like an old, unwanted thing. I wasn't just his father anymore. I had become a man in my own right, someone worthy of respect. The journey of rebuilding myself wasn't just about the money, the new house, or the success of my business. No, it was much more than that. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my self-respect. It was about standing tall even when life had tried to knock me down. Jake, who had once seen me as weak and disposable, was now seeing a man who had endured the worst life had thrown at him and had come out stronger. It was a powerful realization for both of us. I wasn't angry anymore. I had moved beyond the anger and the hurt. What mattered now was that I had found peace within myself. The validation I had once sought from him no longer held the same weight. I had learned that self-worth comes from within, not from the approval of others. Jake and I sat down. The conversation between us quiet at first, but it wasn't filled with the awkwardness I had expected. There was an unspoken understanding between us now. We didn't need to revisit the past to rehash every painful moment. The past was behind us. What mattered was the future that we both had the chance to shape. It wasn't going to be easy. I knew that. Healing takes time. Trust takes time. But for the first time in a long while, I could see the possibility of something new between us. A relationship built not on expectations, but on mutual respect, on acceptance, and on the understanding that neither of us was perfect. I didn't need Jake to apologize or to make grand gestures. The fact that he was here, that he had come to me, was enough. It was his way of showing that he was ready to take responsibility for the things he had done, for the way he had treated me. It was a step, a small one, but a step nonetheless. He didn't have to say the words. His actions were speaking louder than anything else. And in that moment, I knew that this was a new beginning, not just for me, but for both of us. The man who had walked out of that house months ago wasn't the same man who sat in front of Jake now. I had become someone stronger, someone who had found a new sense of purpose. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I had reclaimed my life, and in doing so, I had regained the peace I had long lost. But there was still a long road ahead, one that we would walk together or apart, depending on the choices we made. It was no longer just about me giving everything to him, about trying to mold him into someone I wanted him to be. Now it was about both of us finding our way, separately and together. Jake didn't need me to fix everything for him, just as I didn't need him to validate my worth. We both had our own paths to walk, but what I did need and what I had been searching for was a chance to let go of the past, to let go of the hurt, and to start anew. And now, sitting across from him, I realized that we both had that chance. The pain of the past had shaped us both, but it no longer defined us. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you loved? Someone you gave everything to, only to have them turn their back on you when you needed them most? It's a feeling that cuts deeper than anything else, and it leaves you questioning everything you thought you knew about love, trust, and loyalty. Maybe you've been told you were a burden, pushed aside by someone who should have been there for you. If that's you, I want to hear your story. What did you do when you were faced with that kind of pain and rejection? How did you find the strength to pick yourself up and move forward? I know it's not easy, but it's through those moments of heartache that we often discover the true depth of our own strength. We learn what we're capable of when we have no choice but to stand on our own 2 feet. So if you've ever experienced that kind of betrayal, if you've ever been called a burden, share your thoughts with me in the comments below. I believe that through sharing our stories, we can all learn from each other and find the courage to keep going. And if this story resonated with you in any way, if you found inspiration in the journey of growth and healing, please take a moment to like this video. It helps me reach more people who need to hear these kinds of stories. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on future content that dives into the power of forgiveness, resilience, and the strength we all have within us. Together, we can remind each other that no matter what life throws at us, we always have the power to rise, rebuild, and find our way forward.